Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. We are catching up on a little bit of logistical work that I've been doing over this past week, including the arrival of two of our fuel resupply pods at Venus, bound for Ostrich Station in kind of a medium orbit. These are to refuel the chestnut that is on station to help deliver its crew back home. So our very first pod will light up its B upper stage and kill off a good chunk of that incoming Delta V. I mean, not a whole lot, but then we'll transfer the thruster fuel, decouple, and perform an about face to put that heat shield into the wind in hopes of making a very successful aero braking pass. Now, this is the first time we've actually sent these resupply pods to Venus. It's really nothing new. We've done these to Mars more than a few times, but the first time they've gotten here, really the only difference is we stocked up their ablator. We don't need nearly as much at Mars, but we do need all of it at Venus. So with our about face performed and the well out of the way of our B upper stage, we will make that first thunk into Atmo and watch gloriously as ahead of us the upper stage disintegrates through the Venetian atmosphere. We'll also burn off our ablative struts, and this is where things got a little weird. There was a few extra bits of debris here. You can see our heat shield heating up quite nicely. This is all perfectly nominal, and then, yeah, it just pops. So we've actually done captures at heavier tonnages with similar radius heat shield at a similar altitude. Fortunately, our second resupply pod, which showed up just a few days later, coming in at almost an identical periapsis around Venus, I thought would explode, but yeah, we'd burn off some struts, lose a thruster maybe, and then everything seemed to be fine. We were ablating ablator at a normal rate and continuing on down through the atmosphere until we did make capture shortly thereafter, and eventually would find ourselves into a rather comfortable orbit. Of course, this was all slowed down quite a bit, and we did have to work a little bit to make sure that we stayed completely in prograde, but I'm a little confused as to why two identical tonnage pods with identical flight paths, one would explode and one wouldn't. The F3 box showed that the heat shield overheated and exploded, followed by swiftly everything behind it. It was a rather rapid deceleration. But like I said before, this is a flight path that is nothing new for us. We've actually aero captured several heavy things around Venus in the construction of Ostrich Station alone, and had really good success with it, especially our life support pods, which are probably 50 tons heavier, but only have an additional meter in diameter on the heat shield. So I don't know. There was a game restart and reload after the initial explosion because I thought maybe it was bugged and I'd try it again, but here we are. Half of our supplies made it, so I guess that's still kind of a win, although it's not enough to get the crew home, or rather, it probably isn't enough to get the crew home. Well, we'll have to see. They did show up with quite a bit of fuel, and after a few aerobraking passes to normalize their orbit, we were able to make approach at Ostrich Station very, 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 very slowly, because this thing is a lot of bomb. Kerosene and liquid oxygen on board. Hopefully we didn't lose too much of that liquid oxygen through that spicy capture maneuver, but our docking approach sped up 4 times. I was not going to risk bumping into the station and breaking things, which is why you'll see that solar panel that's probably nowhere near in our way at all has been retracted and folded in, and then we'll just slowly walk up and make contact and then refuel what we can here on Harmonia before ditching the resupply pod into the atmosphere. And on into our next latest mission. We have here the Origami 4T, which captured around Titan a few episodes ago, but we do have to make some Aero braking passes, which we started, I believe, last episode, so that we can get this into a more ideal orbit for the mission at hand, as well as radio and some science to help pay for all of the simulations I've been running for the next generation of Mars landers. So we will go ahead and program in a few of those as we're going to make our next pass through the Titan's atmosphere to lower our apoapsis to something that we can maintain comm range through just those deployable antennas. And I guess with our comms dish folded out and without the big radio wave signals antenna that we burned off, I guess in one of our Aero braking passes many moons ago, we're pretty off balance. So yeah, that's going to be pretty interesting. So we will start to queue things up, including activation of the engines on our Origami glider after boosting ourselves in basically a parking orbit. We want to keep things as even as we can. And well, we're going to put the mothership in a couple of million-meter orbit. There is our separation, which I think looks rather good. I wish I had queued up the robotics to unfurl the wings at this particular moment or bound them to an action group. That would have been a really cool outro thing. Way to go, Crash. As per usual. But for some reason, our wings will not unfurl. Now they will. I guess, yeah, we were in time warp. That was what was going on there. Time warp. So our wings are unfurled. Our mothership is planted in a secure parking orbit. We will probably boost up its periapsis. Having made that first pass, it is well within comms range before we start to aero brake down the orbiter section, which we'll just go ahead and plot a node for here and see what we're looking at. Well, there's our nodes plotted for our mothership. Sorry, I'd like to circularize them so we know that they're well within comms range and kind of get its orbit at least in the same orbital period as the Kronos Tartaros mission that is currently in a polar orbit around Titan. This will help us make sure that we have really good signal coverage, although fortunately, as always, the illuminated side of Titan should be facing Earth, and that is where we would like to make our deorbit and do all of our science. So, one, we can see what we're doing. That's a big plus, and two, we can make sure that has nothing to do with where the sun is, but we'd like to make sure that we have at least one of these satellites overhead. They'll be in a multi-hour orbit, so that they should be able to give us plenty of coverage time, so that we can perform what will inevitably be a very long flight down to the surface of Titan, hopefully spanning more than a few biomes. And with the mothership now in its position, we're going to go ahead and make a deorbit pass, or not a deorbit pass, I'm sorry, an aero braking pass, which will first require us to light our engines and lower our periapsis to within Titan's atmosphere again. Not a big deal, although this thing was never really intended to light those engines in an absolute vacuum. The balance of the glider, rocket-powered glider, very much contradictory. Spacecraft? I guess that's what we'll go with. The weight balance of the spacecraft is just a little bit off, as it was intended to use those engines just for a boost in altitude, climbing while using the wings for lift. That would help kind of compensate for the discrepancy. And so the first initial thought was to just use the RCS to kind of push us, I don't know, I guess laterally to make these changes, although that was proving highly inefficient, as well as the thruster balance being off on that axis also, causing us to tilt and be less than efficient with our maneuvering. I don't know. It was worth a shot. But yeah, keeping us pinned into the axis we want means that we're not dedicating all of our thrusters to moving in the direction that we want, which at this point is wasting fuel. So we'll just give the craft a quick spin to help ullage the engines, and then give them a quick light to drop our periapsis down to something much more reasonable. So we're going to set ourselves a node, and that's kind of the red line. If we get lower than that on this pass, we'll go ahead and light the engines back up so that we can not deorbit on this pass, although we do have radio comms. We don't have any radio ins for scientific instrumentation queued up, and with the signal delay, it's real possible that we'd just screw all that up pretty badly. So we'll actually just go ahead and get ourselves angled in initially, although I will forcefully induce a spin at this altitude to help increase our drag and get as much slowdown from this initial pass as we possibly can. But it would take some time. There's really not enough atmospheric density here to argue with our decision to spin like crazy. So once we had the rotation going, we just locked the tanks on our RCS so that we couldn't compensate for it or really end the spin. So that's kind of what we're doing, is just letting this thing flail and flounder around here as we tear through the atmosphere, actually seeing much more significant braking than I thought we would. And see our periapsis already coming down to the circularized path of our mothership, which is actually going to be, well, it's almost right overhead right now, but a couple more orbits we will be out of sync enough to where we will have to postpone our flight actual to wait until both satellites are in a better position to relay our comms for us, because, oh man, I am not going to miss out on any of this fantastic science that we're getting. So there is a nice replot for our next pass, so we'll just go ahead and take the lap, thinking that we should still have comms through at least one of our satellites for this orbit. Our mothership is kind of at its maximum angle as we enter, but since we're going so much faster than it is possible that we can just walk away from that signal. But I think the Kronos Tartaros orbiter is in a good enough position to pick up our signal. Its orbit is such that right now it will almost always have a view of Earth, so as long as we can have a view of it. We do have one of its antennas tuned to active vessel, and our little glider buddy here has no aimable antennas, just two omnidirectional, I guess, dipoles. Yeah, there's us bouncing our signal off the Tartarus Kronos to get our telemetry data home. Hopefully it'll all bode well. We did dip a little bit deeper this time, just based that we slowed ourselves down. That naturally lowered our periapsis down a few kilometers, but we are already on our way back up after having passed just below the 500 kilometer mark and seeing some really excellent numbers on this aerobraking pass. I know all that twisting and spinning is probably a little unnerving to watch, but it was 100% in the flight plan down to the letter. This is entirely planned for. And, well, we did see this thing fly at Venus, which has a very dense atmosphere. I think really you could fly a bus at Venus. Were you able to get an engine to light? How it will perform on Titan, however, we really have no idea. Running any simulations out this far is ungodly expensive, and especially now that the space program is broke, it really just wasn't an option. I think even when we were building this mission, we were not in the best place financially, so that could explain why we're just here to kind of wing it. I mean, worst case scenario, we fall? I mean, maybe we'll hit the dirt or a lake a little too hard, but I think as long as our core stays intact, our antennas, and one of those RTGs, we should be okay. So with our apoapsis down to something a little reasonable, we're actually going to go ahead and use the engines instead of another aerobraking pass to kind of circularize this in what I feel is a pretty good staging orbit for the next phase of this mission, which is, of course, our actual flight at Titan. So we'll just give this thing a quick side spin to help settle the fuel at the back of the tanks before lighting up all 3 of our 1 kilonewton thrusters. They're actually operating at about 1.8 kilonewtons, but who's counting? And that will lower down our apoapsis enough to be within tolerance, or when out of the atmosphere for the entire orbit, but low enough to where deorbit burn will be silly cheap and can be timed precisely. So that's going to do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.